Hey y'all, I'm Ellen. We've been super inspired by our journeys of self-healing and discovery.
And I'm Sam, and we want to share our experiences with you to help you get curious about yourself, reconnect, and get intentional about your life so you know what makes you happy.
Welcome to Woo New, the podcast. Hey y'all, thanks for joining us. This is Woo New, and today we have a really exciting episode for you. We're talking to Brooke Balliett, who is the co-founder and clinical director of the California Center for Psychedelic Therapy. So Sam and I have been on this journey, and we've definitely delved into psychedelics and really like all this stuff with plant medicine, which is really kind of coming up right now in our sphere, you know, and a lot of chatter about decriminalization and all sorts of stuff like that. Where Brooke comes from is more on the medicinal side, which, you know, was a completely different perspective and approach to plant medicine, a much more regulated approach. And so it was really fascinating to talk to her about what her work entails and, you know, just her perspectives on plant medicine in general and decriminalization, what it's good for, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, for me, it was super fascinating. Not only to get that perspective, because we've never had that perspective before. So it's really interesting to get sort of a peek into like where in this moment is psychedelics and plant medicine sort of within the legal structure of things, but also because she's worked with some crazy therapies like ketamine. In my mind, I was like, all I can see is that YouTube clip of that guy smoking ketamine and then like blasting through that second story glass window. And like, that's it.
Oh my God.
Like that's in my head. What happens with ketamine?
Like, when it's not the right setting and when it's not controlled. Did I say medicinal? I think I meant medical. Like she comes at it from a medical approach.
Yeah.
Is that what I said?
I think you did, but we can work around that, girl.
I feel really lucky because Brooke is actually family. And so what was crazy was just discovering that she's in this line of work, which I actually did not know.
Yeah, it's so crazy. I mean, the thing that I was struck by the most is throughout the whole conversation, she was so smart. Mm-hmm. I was like, afterwards, I was like, I feel like I learned so much from this conversation, but not just that. Like, I was like, am I smarter now because I've been talking to you? Like, is your energy rubbing off on me? Because she's so brilliant and she's so thoughtful about what she does. And she cares a lot about working with psychedelics in these medical settings and helping this sort of progress and become, less stigmatized.
Yeah. And she had literally just gotten trained on psilocybin when we talked to her. So that was also really exciting to hear just, you know, what that process looks like in a medical setting, you know, with two therapists and, you know, just kind of what that looks like, you know, which is very different than somebody who's just like, okay, I'm going to take some shrooms.
Totally. I've always been so curious about that, especially because even when you get into the world of sort of plant medicine and healing circles, even on the more like shamanic, very
ritualistic
and very sort of, for lack of a better word, like trained side of it, it feels like more often than not, we're sort of oscillating between that and like people who go have these like rogue circles in somebody's living room. So it's an interesting conversation to have and to understand the duality between those two. But this is the first time I feel like we've really gone into like the official medical world, which I'm so fascinated by.
Yeah, where it's very formalized and everything is measured and captured, you
and
know,
by the book. Yeah.
Very by the book. Like, I mean, because it has to be, I mean, you have to have your control.
Yeah. You know? Someone has to do that research in order for those results to get out into the world and for, you know, progress to keep moving forward. So it's an incredible interview. I hope you guys love it.
Okay, so we're sitting here today with Brooke Balliett, who is the co-founder and clinical director of the California Center for Psychedelic Therapy. And I'm really excited. She's actually my husband's cousin. And so it was like kind of this like wonderful, I don't know, serendipitous discovery of mine that to find out that you actually work in the psychedelic space, which is something that my interest has just kind of skyrocketed over the last couple of years, with my own sort of journeys with psilocybin and breath work. And I'm now considering myself kind of a psychonaut, and I'm just like wanting to explore all of these different, other states of consciousness, with all these different things. So we're really, really excited to talk to you today.
Well, I'm excited to have you.
So why don't we start off by just having you tell us a little bit about your clinic and what you guys do?
So it's a center, and we do clinical work there. And it's basically brand new, although the seeds for it were planted a long time ago. And so, you came to visit. It's in Hollywood, the southern part of Hollywood on Larchmont Boulevard.
It's a beautiful space.
It's a beautiful space. We renovated and restored a house that was built in 1948 and created a number of offices for different types of treatment. It holds our clinical practice, which was a combination of my private practice that I had doing psychotherapy for about 7 years, and a trainee that I had that came with me in her practice. And then one of the other co-founders, Cole Marta, who's a psychiatrist, his practice, which was primarily ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So we combined those two together, and we needed more space for it, essentially, because as you know, psychedelics are becoming really popular. And along with that is psychedelic-assisted therapy. So it kind of was a perfect storm of Cole and I combining our practices, the culture changing where people were more and more interested in the work that we were doing. And we're both also members of the phase 3 clinical trial for MDMA assisted psychotherapy for severe PTSD. And we lost our site. Another psychiatrist was hosting us at another beautiful old house in North Hollywood. And he sort of changed his direction. And through that, we lost our site. So we had sort of this opportunity to both grow our practice and find a new site for the clinical trials.
Oh, interesting.
And so us combined with Ashley Booth, who's another co-founder, a few other clinicians from the MDMA team, and a few other just associated professionals that we knew sort of brainstormed this idea for a psychedelic center. So we're going to see where it goes. We've only been open since November. We have plenty of space, lots of ideas brewing, and it's just sort of organically growing with the study there, the practice, and then sort of collective space. We're going to have some people come and do psychedelic related trainings. We're working on a garden that's probably going to be some type of legal psychedelic botanical garden.
I love that.
So the vision is that it's sort of the central LA psychedelic center. Everything we do there is legal. Nothing illegal happens there, and it will stay that way. Though still a lot of people ask us to do things because we're in the middle of things that are legal and not. But the vision is that clinically we'll have MDMA assisted psychotherapy after it's rescheduled. Right now, we only have it for clinical trials, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which we already have very busy practice with, and then psilocybin as it comes on board, perhaps ibogaine as it comes on board. Whatever the research shows is effective medically or clinically is kind of where we're at with.
Is the trials that are being done with MDMA, is that through MAPS, or what is that connection? And can you explain a little bit who MAPS is?
Sure. So MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. It's run by an amazing pioneer in psychedelics named Brooke Balliett. And he's been at it since, I think, the early 80s, before many of us were even born. And his goal is to increase access to psychedelics. And one way that he's had great success is by running clinical trials to see if it's useful. Because part of the problem is that psychedelics are scheduled. Most of them are scheduled on what's called Schedule 1. So our government gets to decide whether medicines have use or not, and also if they have addiction potential. And so, collectively as a culture, we want to make sure that we're not giving people things that make them worse, but also not withholding things that make them better. And psychedelics have been sort of trapped in this category of having no medical benefit and high risk for abuse, which is just frankly not true, according to all the research that's happening. So Rick was one of the first people to realize that. I think partly because he and some of the other pioneers on the study, like Michael Mithofer, have been working with them since before. MDMA wasn't scheduled to Schedule 1 until the mid-'80s.
Oh, wow.
So some of the people that have pioneered the studies were working with it prior to it being rescheduled.
And they were just kind of on the underground sort of.
Well, it wasn't underground. It was a medicine that was available. So they were psychiatrists and therapists that were above ground using it before it was made unavailable to them. That's then when it went underground. And so now the purpose of MAPS studies, primarily they're doing right now MDMA and cannabis. But they have done a little bit of psilocybin stuff too in the past to look at the real facts about whether these medicines have benefit. And it's turning out that they do, according to the prior phases. So we're currently in phase 3 with MDMA for severe PTSD, which I think has something to do with it also. PTSD is a huge public health issue. We've been at war forever, for my entire life. And so we have a lot of people that are serving for our freedom that then don't have any care when they come back. So again, it kind of was two routes that came together, was sort of people going like, well, this seemed like it was helpful before, but now because of unrelated cultural reasons, it's not available as a medicine anymore. And we have some huge public health issues that need to be addressed culturally. So yeah, so now we're in phase 3, which means we're coming close on potential rescheduling. We'll never know until the data comes out what the real impact is.
What's the time frame? Like if it's now the third sort of round, how many more rounds does it require?
So we're in the middle of phase 3, and phase 3 is likely to be the last round.
Okay.
But you never know. Every single time there's a study with a medicine that's restricted in scheduling, the DEA and the FDA have a lot of say in how it's used. Every molecule of it is measured. It's highly guarded. It's produced, in a government approved lab rather than the way people use it recreationally. And so every single bit of the way sort of guides the timeline.
Got it.
But it's feeling like we're halfway through the last phase. Then the data will have to be, compiled and then presented. And then I'm sure there's a process of how the FDA then approaches it after the data is out, what happens next.
Wow.
So do you guys ever work with LSD, and where does that sit on as far as regulations go?
I don't know as much about that. I don't work with it personally. I think there are a couple studies out of Europe where there's been some benefits to it, but I can't speak directly on it. LSD in the clinical world, at least in my clinical world that I live in, is sort of probably the last to come for two reasons. One is that it's not a, quote, plant medicine, and there's a push for natural medicines as separate than synthetic medicines. I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point today. The other thing is that if you think about sort of what does popular culture know about LSD, it's the most memorable, it's the most disruptive. And so not to get too political, but I think that if we're saying, we need government approval to use these medicines, LSD's last in line.
It has a lot of stigma.
It has a lot of stigma. Yeah. And the people who are making the decisions now still remember that they lived through the Summer of Love, et cetera. So
that makes a lot of sense, actually. And I don't know why in my mind, and obviously I wasn't alive at the time, but like I always lump psilocybin mushrooms in with that. So it's interesting that psilocybin is kind of having its moment right now and kind of coming through.
Yeah. Do you think that's like from our own like upbringings? Because I do that too.
Yeah. And I think of it I know that they're two separate things, but to me it's like those who were doing acid were also doing mushroom, that to me it felt very not interchangeable, but synonymous or of the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those were kind of the main two, I grew up in the early 90s. I was in high school, graduated in 95. So like those were the two that people were doing.
Yeah.
throughout that time, and a little bit of MDMA sort of recreationally, but I do that too. They're not any more related than any of the other ones.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. So you guys specifically, it's ketamine, MDMA, and now it sounds like psilocybin's coming through.
Yeah. So psilocybin is in phase 2 trials. I just got trained, which I think is what you're referring to. I got trained to do psilocybin therapy through the phase 2 clinical trials, which are not yet in LA. Knock on wood. Hopefully they'll come. There's 2 major companies working on psilocybin in the US. One of them is Usona, and the other one is Compass. And I was trained by Compass on their clinical trials. So beautiful training, beautiful model, loved it a lot. Some of the basic similarities to, so, it's almost like religion. They're sort of like the basic truths are the same, but then the layers of language and uses is totally different.
Gotcha. Can you take us through your training a little bit and like what you learned? And
Yeah. So I learned a lot about psilocybin. I've been interested in it. I think it's an interesting plant. I think mushrooms in general are really interesting. And having seen what ketamine and MDMA can do for people that have, diagnosable mental health issues, I was very curious to get my hands on that in that setting. And so the company is based out of London. It's a little different than some of the other companies. MAPS is a nonprofit. Usona is a nonprofit. Compass is not. It's for profit. So, depending on your orientation, you can come with a preload about what that means. But I found it to be really refreshing as a person who was a therapist first. And then, I sort of see it as like you have to learn to do the broader brushstroke of what your skill is going to be, and then you can hone in. And sort of that's where I came from. Is I became a therapist not just to work with psychedelics. I became a therapist because I was interested in consciousness and giving back to the world and seeing if I could make a dent in at least a few people suffering. And then I got interested in psychedelics, and the Compass training was very much along lines of that. It was mostly licensed clinical psychologists.
Do you have to be? Or in order to go to the training?
So yes, you do. And everybody gets to decide differently, right? In California, if you're going to do psychotherapy, you have to be registered or licensed with one of the boards. So there's the Board of Behavioral Sciences, the medical boards, the Board of Psychiatry, and then the Board of Psychology. And so you go through your training, and then that includes degrees usually, and then clinical hours that you practice, and then tests to get licensed, supervised time. Compass is having, yes, everybody has to have a clinical training and a license to practice. MAPS has had a little bit of a different thing. Everybody's been eligible, but some people are pre-licensed. And we'll see what happens after things get rescheduled. We don't know. Both of the models are a co-therapy model. So you have 2 therapists in the room.
For psilocybin as well.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And at least when the medicine's on board, not always for every session, but when the medicine's on board, you do, primarily because they're really long. You could imagine if you've ever been in therapy, it's a long time, 6 to 8 hours. So, but that adds cost too. So we'll see what happens. I don't know if it's actually going to be as accessible as it maybe needs to be if it is 2 therapists for 8-hour days.
What kind of therapy what kind of issues are people coming in with that you're studying?
Right. Well, so when something's in clinical trial, it's a very narrow funnel, right? So let's imagine that maybe MDMA, for instance, is going to be really valuable for lots of reasons. It might help people be able to think about things that have been difficult for them without the same emotional charge. It might help people communicate in a new way with their partners or their community members, their families. It might do something in your body where if you have some body-based somatic stuff, but we don't get to know that yet. All we get to know is what happens specifically with trauma, right? Because that's the only thing we're allowed to use it with right now. And for psilocybin, at least in the trials that I'm familiar with, it's for depression, primarily treatment-resistant depression, meaning that people have tried 2 or more other options to treat their depression and it hasn't gone away.
And usually pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Usually a few pharmaceuticals, because it's, that's really what we're talking about here, is that the psychedelics are medicines, at least in this setting.
Got it.
And then they're assisted by psychotherapy. Although there are plenty of therapies on their own that work really well for both trauma and depression. So if you're talking, Sam, about the clinical trials for psilocybin that Compass is running, you're only treating people who have treatment-resistant depression. If you're talking about MAPS's MDMA trials, you're only treating people who have severe PTSD. And there's all number of layers of screening, and not even everyone with treatment-resistant depression gets into a clinical trial.
I see.
Ketamine is more free because it's generic. It's been available. It's been prescribed off-label for many, many years for depression. And so with that, we have a little more freedom to treat what the research shows is effective. So it's also treatment-resistant depression, in particular, people who have suicidal ideation, attempts, desires to end their life. It can lift that.
With ketamine then, because there's a little bit more leeway, as a psychologist, could you actually have theories about how you could use ketamine and then employ it and put it in practice?
Yeah, you could. We could. Okay. And a lot of people are. Some people are starting to do it in groups. Some people are. There's all different administration methods. So some people are using what's called a psycholytic style, where it's a low dose and you still can stay engaged. We use a psychedelic style. So they have, essentially a blast off, where for a good portion of our sessions, they're actually having their own internal psychedelic experience.
How long does that last?
It lasts about 45 minutes, the way that we administer, which is intramuscular injection.
I heard it's pretty intense.
Yeah, it is.
And that must hit them almost immediately.
It takes about 5 minutes.
Okay.
And then peaks around 20. And then by about 45, it wears off, and the therapist helps them come back into the room a little bit, but they don't feel totally normal. Typically it's like a little woozy. Ketamine's an anesthetic also. And so if you've ever had any dental surgery or any kind of a minor surgery, it's kind of like when you come back from that, you're a little I know what's going on and I could talk, and it's not like I can't see what's real anymore, but things just feel a little surreal for a little bit, about 2 to 4 hours after that.
And is that usually where the integration happens also in the therapy session?
In the therapy session, yes, that's when the integration happens. Although I really think that the integration happens in between sessions. And so at least at our center, we really try and support people in finding things and doing things that help them continue to let that unfold in between sessions. One thing that is sort of a myth, in my opinion, about psychedelics is that they're this panacea that's going to solve everybody's problems. And they're not. I mean, they're beautiful tools, but they're not inherently healing.
Yeah.
They can be horribly damaging as well. And so a big part of good psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is helping people have realistic expectations and knowing what they can do and shouldn't do, like driving home. You can't drive home after you have ketamine, for instance. You have to have a ride or an Uber because it would be really dangerous.
Isn't that true for all psychedelics, or is it more specific to ketamine?
That's a great question. In the trials, they need a ride home also. And those are things I guess I say it so concretely for ketamine because that's what we know. And, when medicines are still experimental, we don't actually know yet. For MDMA, they spend the night.
Oh, they do?
And then go home with a ride the next day.
Oh, wow.
But some of that is what's required for the trial to be approved. And we'll see if that's going to happen.
What's the rationale with the overnight stay?
I think that I don't actually know. I think that it was safety originally in a prior phase of the study, although I'm not really sure about that. I know there's, I think, 1 or 2 sites now that are not doing overnights.
Okay.
We do. That's partly why we got that beautiful house that I was talking about before, is it's required to have people stay overnight. And not to mention, it just feels nicer to spend all day somewhere that doesn't feel like a doctor's office.
Yeah. And I can imagine also after having that experience, just feeling safe and kind of contained for a little bit.
Yeah. Comfortable and contained.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is psilocybin the same way? So I think we kind of like cut you off from explaining the whole process of that.
So every clinical trial is different. And so it's the same as if they were experimenting with a new cancer drug or anything. It just totally depends on what the prior, so there's like all of these phases of trials, right? And we're talking about end phases. So somewhere along the line, they were like, okay, but if they stay overnight, so I wasn't around at that time. I don't know why they made that decision, but somewhere along the line, someone decided that was a good idea. And so far it seems to be a good idea.
Gotcha.
Okay. So some of the psilocybin trials are likely like that, and some of them are not like that. It just depends on the protocol, what the goal is, and who's monitoring it.
Okay, so there's multiple trials going on for different reasons.
Yes.
For different goals with psilocybin. Okay, I see. Yeah. So the one that you were trained for is specifically for, it was not
treatment-resistant depression.
Okay, depression. So what does that actually look like? What does a session with psilocybin actually look like?
So if you guys have read Michael Pollan's book, or if you have seen Anderson Cooper or any of the MAPS literature, you've seen what it looks like. Generally, the rooms are meant to look pretty comfy, like we were just talking about. There's a couch or a bed of some type. There are eye shades, so people can either keep their eyes open or closed and not be too overstimulated by the environment. There are headphones, and then there are curated playlists that people can listen to. And the goal is to spend some time inside of yourself, so that you have an opportunity with the medicine on board to see things a little bit differently. What we know about psychedelics is that they collectively, all of them, change our thinking, our cognition changes, our perception changes, and our sense of emotionality changes. So we can feel different and things look different, and we think differently about all of that. And so that opportunity, the hypothesis is that there's something about that experience that heals people. And if you look beyond, to some of the other things you've explored outside of medicine and outside of psychology, what have psychedelics been used for? And that's a lot of what it is getting to know yourself, knowing how you fit into the universe, what's your purpose, how are you connected to your world around you? And so that's the same. And only the medicine leads the way there. The music is meant to support that. The sort of environmental stimuli or lack of it is meant to support that. But that's the goal.
What kind of music do you play for them? Is it just like sounds?
It is sounds.
Sorry, I should be more clear. I meant to say I was going to say primordial sounds, but then I felt like that was maybe too specific, like sound bowls and prayers.
Like sounds versus music.
Yes,
right.
Sorry.
So both. It is both, actually. It's it depends again on which company you're talking about, which doctor you're working with, but in general, there are some basic guidelines. MAPS, for instance, does quite a bit of training on how to pick music.
Cool.
Compass gives you a playlist that's pre-picked. So it just depends, but there are some similarities to them. One thing that is avoided sort of across the board is lyrics.
Okay.
So if we're thinking about you want someone to go inward with themselves, if you have somebody talking all the time or singing, it takes you outside of yourself. There's words are concepts, they're symbols for other things that we know about. And so that doesn't mean there can be no voices, but definitely no lyrics, especially in any language that anyone would recognize. And along those lines, not too much preloading of ideas. So I really like chanting, for instance, which is vocal, but not words. But I've been practicing Buddhism for 20 years. I have some ideas about what that means for me. And so we try and really avoid very particular cultural references as well. And so when I make playlists, the genres are sort of classical. Johns Hopkins uses classical, Baroque mostly, but also some ambient. I like to do some tribal. I love a little nature sounds in there at some point. Silence in between is always good. And I arrange my playlists sort of on mood or tempo. So for ketamine, for instance, where it's a little shorter, I'll give people options if it seems appropriate. Are you feeling like you'd like something that's a little more relaxing or something a little more activating today? If people have a preconception about what, if their mom was a classic violinist or something, they maybe don't want to pick
classical
music on one day, or maybe they do on another day. So there's some, I think in my Spotify, I think I have probably about 20 different options of playlists at this point. And mostly they're sort of based on those general categories. And I think that's pretty standard. I do share them with other therapists who do similar work, and they share theirs with me, and they're all, everyone has their own flavor, but they're roughly similar.
So in the Compass or the way they do their I guess their process, like you have to stick to their playlist and not deviate from it at all.
Yeah.
And that's the way they control it.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's so fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting to work with the two different companies to see the differences. Because I'm more of a scientist, I like to use these medicines in therapy because they work. They make people's symptoms decrease in a very scientific, measurable way. And so I was always curious with MAPS. I was like, how come we could then just pick music? It seems like a factor that's sort of compounding, But the reality is that the studies are about the medicine. The people who wrote the protocols and definitely the trainers and the people who deliver are about the therapy. But ultimately, the goal of the studies is to reschedule the medicine so people can have access to them.
Gotcha.
And again, it's one of those things. We'll see what happens with the music after there's more freedom to play around with what works and what doesn't.
I see. So they may start out fairly controlled, and through the trials, it may loosen up a little bit potentially,
or after the trials are done, kind of like you were saying with ketamine. Like if we wanted to, we could just think like, oh, this might work, and then try it
and explore more.
Yeah. We tend to be more research driven at our center. So if we wanted to do, let's say, group work with ketamine, or maybe if we wanted to do ketamine with a totally different type of music, our medical director would encourage us to do research on it, to collect some data so that we could publish it. Because it's a fine line, right? Therapy and psychology in general are artistic in a lot of ways, but also it can get really dangerous if you just start saying like, here's what I think is good for you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So unless it's really good, measurably good for someone, we try not to play around with it too much in the clinic,
Mm-hmm.
Are the studies too new to see how long the effects of these sessions last?
Yes, long-term they are. We do have phase 2 data that's been published from MDMA, and there is, I think, there's definitely a 1-year follow-up. I believe a 2-year follow-up too. A Johns Hopkins psilocybin trial also has a 1-year follow-up. Both in the MAPS phase 2 MDMA and the Johns Hopkins study, the benefits increased. So symptoms continued to decrease as time passed, which is one of the most exciting and hopeful things. Is with the medicines we have to treat depression and trauma, that's not what happens. Is there tends to be, if there's any effect, it's short term right away, and then we adjust and our symptoms go back to what they were before. Where both MDMA and psilocybin, based on prior trials, look like there is the potential for some long term healing, or maybe even continued reduction.
Wow.
With a very short exposure to the medicine. So that's a pretty mind-blowing different model of psychopharmacology than we've had before.
Yeah. So it almost, even if these treatments may be more expensive in the short run, it sounds like the lasting effects almost kind of counter or make up for the difference.
Yeah, hopefully. If people can't get them at all because they're too expensive, and we're talking about very expensive.
What's the ballpark?
The ketamine now, the way we do it, which is research-based, it costs about $4,500 for a month of treatment. It's a short term.
How many sessions does that get you?
That's an intake session at 8.
8 ketamine sessions.
Twice a week for 4 weeks is the typical recommended protocol for treatment-resistant depression. It can vary a little for anxiety and some types of trauma. But in general, that's what we call the intensive, and it's sort of meant to get you to the place where you want to be, and then you go to a maintenance phase. But still, that's a lot of money for people out of pocket. MDMA is looking to be significantly more.
Because it's 2 people.
It's 2 people. It's all day. Ketamine has the benefit of being very short. It's 90 minutes to 120 minutes per session. where if you're talking about 2 people for 8 hours, that triples to quadruples that cost.
Wow.
So,
and psilocybin sounds like it's going to follow that as well. Okay.
Yeah. So we don't know yet how, I think that there's a lot of different people working on access and thinking about what's going to happen next, but it's a big barrier right now is access.
I feel like Ellen and I talk about all the time how people speak about psilocybin as if it's just behind marijuana in legalization and becoming accessible to the public. But there's so much variance in how those experiences come through that I can't even imagine finding a way to standardize that to access it. Like based on what you've seen, I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of like, where do you see this going in the future as far as legalization?
Right. Well, so there's 2 different things happening. We've been talking about medicalization, right? And so if you talk about like, how is this medicine going to be available to somebody after it's available, once it's rescheduled, for instance? When we talk about psilocybin clinical trials, people aren't eating mushrooms. The psilocybin is synthesized in a lab. It's quantified. So when you take mushrooms, you don't really know how much psilocybin you're taking, even if you think you have a really good source and they try and tell you. They're plants. It's like saying these 2 tomatoes have the exact same amount of vitamin C per bite. Right. They don't. And so in the labs for the trials, when it's medicalized, it's standardized and quantified in a way that it's not when you talk about decriminalization or legalization. One's not better than the other, in my opinion. I support both of them. I think that in my world, there is a distinction between people who are generally healthy and use psychedelics for insight, to enhance their relationships, for fun, for spiritual purposes. And then there's people who have significant mental health issues or psychological issues or medical issues. And the use of the medicines is different based on that. And so I think that there's not a problem to have both of those routes being taken simultaneously, because there's 2 sort of different uses that we're talking about based on 2 different needs. People who just want to try it for fun or think that it should be accessible because it's ridiculous that it's not. And our government has no business telling us what we can do, especially when we have way more dangerous things that are available to us daily. And then the people that really could benefit and become healthier people in general, more functional people in their lives from using it as medicine. And I think that they will cross over sometimes. I do think, we were just talking about access. Right. If you have severe PTSD and you can't afford the medicine, you might take it on the underground. You might take it for fun. It's not that hard to find in a big city, at least. And then what happens, at least that we've seen with some of the other medicines, is people then call us. And they're like, I actually think I need to talk to a psychiatrist.
Right.
But the vast majority of people are fine and they can benefit. And so I don't know if that addresses your question, Sam, but I think for some people, standardization is really important. And that's why the medicalization is important. And for other people, it's going to be just like putting seasoning on your food and you're just going to figure out what your taste is. And hopefully there'll be enough harm reduction and education and safe spaces to use safely in.
So it sounds like, and my knowledge in like the decriminalization and the political side of this is fairly limited, but when they say decriminalization, it has no bearings whether it's medical or commercial. I get, like, for lack of a better word, recreational. It's both, right? I mean,
yes and no, because of that difference I just laid out. And so far, when we talk about decriminalization, it is following the cannabis pathway. And I think that's why it's progressing, but also why there's some backlash about, like, is it a privileged movement? People are only attempting to decriminalize plant medicines. Plant medicines are the ones that rich white people use for the most part. They're the drugs that people are not getting arrested for. And so if you had a psilocybin tablet, would it be different than if you had mushrooms? That's like a great question that we don't know the answer to yet.
Right.
You know?
Gotcha.
Like you can buy Xanax on the black market, for instance, or you can have a prescription for Xanax, right? And so it's like, it would be different based on different things. I imagine it might be like that, but I'm as curious as you guys are to see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, just also in the use of it, to me, like, I've only just stepped a toe into using cannabis as a psychedelic therapy too. And this is, above ground, but done with like a person who's been trained by a psychotherapist to like guide a group or a circle, in its use. But my cannabis journey, vastly different than my psilocybin journeys. And, I feel like it's really up to me, this, like, to determine if I can handle one over another, or if I need guidance, or, it's like, it's very individual and unmeasured, and it's completely based off of my own experience, I guess, and my experience is going to be vastly different than the next person's experience.
And your own biochemistry.
Yes.
Because I know a little bit about you, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you have like a crippling social anxiety disorder.
Right.
If you went to that same cannabis circle, you might have a horrible experience that led you to a psychiatrist's office. It could even deepen something latent inside of you, but because you're relatively healthy, you have the liberty of exploring, how is this versus that? Do I want to do that again or not? And sort of always come back to this sort of safety of your life outside of your experiences.
Right. That's the part that worries me, or at least puts a little bit of this like flag in my head when we're talking about, and I am very much for decriminalization, but it also seems like psilocybin, mushrooms, LSD, whatever, like plant medicine, they're not all equal. And the way you use it is very, very different. Yeah. And, it almost seems like there may need to be some, not barriers, but just rules or something when it comes to mushrooms versus cannabis. And, or is it up to everybody to just determine for themselves what they're,
Are you talking age limits, like with alcohol and nicotine?
Yeah, or? Maybe. I don't know what it looks like. Maybe it's age, or maybe, because, or dose it. I mean, it's so hard. It's like, it is kind of like it's up to everybody to sort of determine. Yeah,
I think that's a good question. Like, are we going to be able as a society to adjust the things that we do? It's the same for alcohol, I guess, and most of us are okay. True. But the things that we do all day long don't really jive with the psychedelic experience and what happens to people, the ways people tend to change when they do a lot of psychedelics. So it's an interesting time.
Yeah, very much.
I know. I was like, people are crazy and people are having trouble with just marijuana, And then that whole thing came out after marijuana became legalized, where all of a sudden they were like, oh my gosh, well, can you drive under the influence? And what are the limits to that? And I was like, oh my gosh, psilocybin's never going to be able to handle that.
That's a whole policy. I mean, there has to be a whole government movement to regulate all of that. And I don't want to sound too like conspiracy theorist, but does our government really want us to be using these things? I'm
definitely
not.
Yeah. I feel like definitely not.
What in your life, like, personally drew you to psychedelics and this kind of therapy?
Yeah. Total synchronicity. Like I mentioned before, I like even sort of feel like I went into psychology kind of by accident, which is ridiculous because I have a bachelor's, master's, and a doctorate. Like that's not,
there was some plan there somewhere.
But like, I think I really have been interested in consciousness forever. I had my first out of body experience when I was little, like 2. My father died when I was really young. I was very curious about what that meant and where he went. And, I think really early on in life, I got sort of confronted with a lot of existential questions. And psychology is a really great field where you really get to indulge that and have a practice of experiencing it. So it was kind of how I think I continued to study. I also had a daughter really young, and that was the sort of the opposite of the experience I had with my father, where I was kind of like, where did she come from? How is that? Like, what is this thing that's happening? It's this miraculous making a human out of nothing, and how do you become one thing versus another thing? And so that was kind of my like meandering way through school. And I was practicing Buddhism really heavily in like my 20s, and ended up dating somebody who was born and raised in New Mexico. And I was sort of figuring, I'd taught art for a long time. I was figuring, what do I want to do next? And there's a really great transpersonal psychology graduate school in Santa Fe called Southwestern College. Highly recommend if anyone's thinking of going into psychedelic therapy. It's a really good basis. It's not a psychedelic therapy program, but it is a transpersonal psychology program, which is sort of the foundation for a lot of this work. Learned things like channeling and did vision quests and lots of the things that sort of overlap with the underground these days, or just people's own personal exploration. And then ended back here in LA and worked for a long time for the county, and just got real tired of running out of things to do, running out of ways to help people that really needed help. And there was just a lot of intergenerational trauma and lots of depression and suicide and community violence and personal violence that just was endless. And there were no opportunities to help. So I kind of fell into harm reduction work on the side while I was working that job. And I met some people at MAPS who run sort of a sub-project of MAPS called the Zendo Project, where they do harm reduction. So they basically go around and create safe spaces for people in festivals and concerts and big crowded events where people might be taking drugs, including psychedelics, and sort of reduce harm, meaning make sure they don't get arrested, hospitalized, cause any damage to their relationships or their bodies, and basically just sit with them until the drugs were off. And so then that's how I got hooked up with the MDMA clinical team that I now work with that does the study. And through that process, it was just the flip side of feeling that sort of burnout and sadness about not having anything to help, and really seeing I had declined the invitation to join the clinical team for the study because the job that I had was very good. I liked it. And I was supervising someone named Shannon, who's now the director of training for the MDMA clinical trials. And she invited me to come to the training just as a gift for being her supervisor. And I just fell in love with how well it worked. Wow. And so then from there, it was like, I'm not going to not do this if it's available, because there's nothing else available. And I just felt really moved to participate. Mm-hmm. And it became, the ball just kept rolling. That's partly why we're sitting here today. And so about 2 years ago this week, I quit the county job, and now I've just been doing full-time psychedelics since. And so it was really just a sort of a natural progression. I'd known about psychedelics since I was a teenager. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really ever, I get a little giddy still, like the 16-year-old in me is like laughing at the fact that this is like something that we're able to do.
When I heard about your job, I was like, oh my God, that's the coolest job ever. Also, you must see some really heavy stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in general, working in central LA for the last, 12 years, psychedelics or not, there's a lot of heavy stuff when you work in a big city like this. In modern times, maybe not even in a big city. So yeah. There's a lot of self-care, and, we have a community. That's one thing that's been really nice about the psychedelic therapy community, is that it's growing daily. And we take good care of each other, and everybody is seeing a lot of really gnarly stuff. And ultimately it's an honor. It's really beautiful to witness what people go through. And the core of therapy is that in my opinion, it exists because we don't have anywhere to share that darkness. There's nowhere to put it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really honored to be that person for so many people.
Yeah.
I can't complain.
It's amazing. There's a lot of people, myself included, that dabble in the recreational side of, of psychedelics. And I'm curious, especially right now, because it just feels very, very Wild West. It feels like very, obviously unregulated. And, what would be your biggest pieces of advice or watch outs for anybody who is not even recreationally, but just curious about using psychedelics as a means to deeper insight about themselves or awaken or find purpose, whatever it may be?
I feel like I want to just start wagging my finger. I like when it's just like mom mode. I want to be like, don't do this and watch out for that. But, it's trust your gut. I think, first of all, it's illegal. All of it is illegal. Mm-hmm. And so despite, again, that sort of like fantasy that this is like this amazing new thing that's going to change us all, you can still get arrested on drug charges. You can still cause great damage to yourself, your physical body, and your psyche. Being on psychedelics is inherently vulnerable. So you want to be very sure you know the credentials and reputation of the people that you're sitting with. There are people both above ground and underground that are doing harm. Mm-hmm. They're hurting people while they're on psychedelics. And so you want to make sure if you're using a guide or a therapist that you have some references, that you can check their credentials and that you're not going to get arrested. Test your drugs. Stand Safe has great test kits. Know your source and listen to your gut first and foremost. Have someone with you who's not on drugs. So if you feel like you want to, take ayahuasca, have someone there that you trust that knows what you're doing, isn't doing it, knows what to do if certain things happen, so that you can really go fully into the experience and you can kind of outsource to a trusted, known person the things like, what if my dog wants to go outside? Or what if my mom calls? Or
what if my mom calls?
What if the power goes out?
All very important things.
Yeah, that's very totally fair.
Man, I feel like I have a bazillion other questions, but I'm actually curious, like from doing all this work, and I know that you guys are kind of getting started with this center. What has been the biggest learning for you, or the biggest takeaway for you from doing all of this work?
I think it's that we don't know much about ourselves yet. I think that we live in a time where we have so much information and people are so sure they know what's right and what's wrong. And I mean, daily, I have that flipped on its head in front of me. I've seen things happen, even just in regular ketamine sessions that are just frankly unbelievable. And that's just made me really think about, we're just at the very tip of understanding what consciousness is and how our brains work, and even things like what relationship or culture are and how technology fits into that. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that we don't know, and that's actually a good thing. So that keeps me down the quest of continuing to want to learn and keeping an open mind about all of it.
Yeah, that's actually really, that's so important, because you're right. I do feel like, even in our own journeys, I feel like we're constantly reaching new peaks and then getting the rug pulled from under us again, and then being in the dark again and then reaching another peak. And, I feel like that's just life and how you learn and, the process.
We like to say, trust the process as sort of the guideline for the work that we do. And it's sort of that, like, as all of these things we've talked about, just sort of trusting the process and that what's happening is what's supposed to happen and that we'll see what happens next.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on microdosing?
Professionally, I have none because there's not a lot of good data yet. I think I'm really curious to see how that pans out. I think if you're thinking about microdosing psilocybin in particular, there's a lot of good anecdotal data that's wonderful for mood, creativity, et cetera, but none of that's really been quantified yet. I'm not so sure. I heard someone told me that their friend is going to microdose ayahuasca, 30 days of microdosing ayahuasca. And I was like, I don't know if that just sounds like is
intense.
That like why, you know? So I guess I'm kind of in the, like, I'm curious and interested to see if I can learn more about it. You know, generally if you take something, psychedelics are pretty healthy they're not unhealthy. I should say, we don't know if they're healthy yet, but they're not unhealthy. They're not particularly dangerous for most of us. There are some sort of little medical things to watch out for, but if you're taking something at a level that's imperceptible, a la homeopathy, then it's likely a placebo effect. So, you know, whatever works for you. But I'm definitely keeping my eye on what happens with research in regards to microdosing.
Is there actual research being done?
I feel like there's a microdose LSD study somewhere that's happening, but I can't remember the details. And I haven't heard about anything else.
Okay. And so this might be a silly question, but Ellen was telling me earlier that because not all mushrooms are the same, we know a lot of people who microdose. I'm using air quotes right now because they just will like nibble on a stem, and they think, that even if it's been ground up and measured out, that they're getting the same amount of psilocybin every day, but that's not the case, right?
No, that's not the case.
Okay. So it's a much more complicated, I think, than people realize.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one thing I do feel obligated to say is it's never really a good idea to take more drugs, to decide to take more drugs after you've started taking drugs. So sometimes the nibblers, that's kind of the goal, is that they're like, I'll take a little, and it's good to go slow and low. If you're taking drugs recreationally, you can take more and you can't untake. But I also don't recommend this like sort of casual, like I'm not going to do a lot, so I'll just kind of keep doing a little, because that can be a danger zone for some.
Because you don't know what
impact. Typically, for safe dosing procedures, you would want to know how much you're supposed to take. And again, DanceSafe has really good information cards you can get, or look at their website and they'll tell you a recommended dose and how long you should wait before you choose to take another dose. So on top of not really knowing what you're taking, you could nibble on a stem that has 4 times the psilocybin you were expecting, and then you're 4 times higher than you want it to be.
Right. Well, this has totally opened my eyes in 1,000 ways that I feel like I'm going to be processing and more questions are going to come up. But thank you so much for just sharing all of your knowledge. And I feel like this won't be our only conversation.
Yeah, I feel like I'm smarter just having listened to you. Thank you.
Amazing.
If you guys would like to learn more about Brooke or the California Center for Psychedelic Therapy, you can find more information online at psychedelictherapyca.com, or you can email admin@psychedelictherapyca.com.
And if you are in need of some soul care tools for your daily rituals, we got them at daughtersbrand.com, brand.com. So we have a ton of aromatherapy products, candles, sprays, journal sets, you name it. So come visit us online at daughtersbrand.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please take time to rate and review us.
And follow us.
Yeah. All the things. Music for Woo New is composed by Adam Miller.